Before we get into the video, I need to acknowledge ratting. Ratting is not good. Yes, you place higher with ratting, but there's way more cons than pros for why you should rat. The main reason is that you don't really get better at the game by ratting around. Also, the game prioritizes kills over placement. So if you're looking to climb, I think it's more efficient to get a couple of kills and die, rather than coming second with 0 kills. I'm pointing this out because it relates to the topic of this video. I'm totally not salty because ranked is devolving into games where there's 9 people left in the last zone, essentially making it a coin flip on who wins. But hey, such is life. Alright, let me go back to talking about what you came here for. In order to avoid pointless deaths, the most important thing that you need to do is learn how to compare the strength between you and your enemy. I'd even say that it's the most useful skill that you can develop in this game. Think about it. When you're looking to fight, ideally, you try and fight someone who's weaker than you. If you can accurately tell how strong someone is, then you can fight winning battles and avoid the losing ones. At this point, you might be wondering exactly how to measure the strength of your enemy. Well, there are at least 6 things that you should consider before you fight. That is, weapon mastery, matchups, items, levels, situational scenarios, and location. We'll be going into more depth about these things. Weapon mastery is probably the easiest way to tell if someone is stronger than you. If they have a higher weapon mastery, then you might not want to fight them. Also keep in mind that in terms of weapon mastery, you get your weapon skill at level 7, and you can upgrade it again at level 14. This is important to remember because weapon skills add a lot of power to a survivor's kit, so when they level it up, they hit a small power spike. For example, the difference between a level 5 and a level 6 weapon mastery isn't as large as the difference between a level 6 versus a level 7 weapon mastery. Survivor matchup is also a huge way of determining strength. If your enemy naturally does well against your survivor, then it can devalue certain advantages that you have over them. Let's use the Kathy vs Scylla matchup where both of them are even in terms of skill. Even if the Scylla is a bit weaker than the Kathy, let's say that she was 2 levels down in terms of weapon mastery, Scylla would still have the upper hand because her kit naturally counters Kathy. Looking at people's items is also a good indicator of their strength. There are a couple things to consider when comparing items. First, what weapon do they have? Weapons add a ton of raw damage to a survivor's kit, so if their weapon has a higher rarity than yours, then they are most likely stronger. However, still keep in mind the stats of their weapon. For example, if there's a Jackie with a gigantic axe, and let's say you're playing Jackie as well, but you have a rose knife instead, you'd get absolutely crushed, because even though both weapons are of blue rarity, the gigantic axe grants 110 attack power, while the rose knife only grants 20. Second, do they have any RNG items? RNG items tend to have more value in terms of raw stats when compared to regular items. So if your enemy has 6 RNG items while you have none, then you really have no business fighting them. Third, what stats does their build give? Typically, builds tend to focus on a couple of stats. Some of the common ones are crit, skill amp, health, attack power, and attack speed. This is useful to know because it gives you information on how they might play during the fight. For example, a skill amp Magnus is going to want to stun you, then use his spin to kill you, while an attack power Magnus is going to look to auto attack you to death. Also, certain builds are optimal on certain characters. For example, crit Kathy is said to be stronger than skill amp Kathy, so if you're going against a skill amp Kathy, then you know there's less of a threat than if you're reversing crit Kathy. Lastly, how close are they to full build? In the early to mid game, it's important to pay attention to how many completed items they have. If they have 4 completed items, while you only have 3, then I'd advise against fighting them, because the odds aren't in your favor. You should always be paying attention to what level your enemy is, because with each level, they gain an increase in stats, and they're also able to upgrade their skills. Each survivor has a different skill order, but a good thing to note is that people can put a point into their ultimate at levels 6, 11, and 16, which gives them access to even more damage. Levels follow the same principle as weapon mastery. The difference between a level 10 versus a level 11 tends to be greater than the difference between a level 9 versus a level 10. There are also a couple of situational things to consider. First, how much health do they have? Even if an enemy is stronger than you, if they just want to fight and only have 100 health left while you're about to shamelessly third party them and you have full HP, then you're highly likely to win. Second, how much SP do they have? If an enemy doesn't have SP, then they only have access to their auto attacks, making it much easier to kill them. Do keep in mind that later in the game, people really don't have SP issues, mainly because of SP items, SP consumables, meditation mastery, and also their levels. So the best time to abuse this is definitely in the early game. Third, are their abilities on cooldown. This mainly applies to their ult cooldown, because ultimates tend to be crucial parts of survivors' kits. So if you know that they've blown their ultimate while yours is up, then it could be a good time to fight them. This is really easy to abuse if they're a survivor that heavily relies on their ultimate, like a Shoichi or Elite Island. You can use the same principle for their regular skills, but skill cooldowns tend to be shorter than ultimate cooldowns, so you don't have as large of a window to abuse them. Fourth, what stage of the game is it? Each survivor peaks at a certain point in the game. It's important to have an understanding of when other survivors hit their power spikes. For example, you generally want to be wary of a Hyunwoo early game because he has really high base damage for the early game, and you can also easily build his weapon in 1 to 2 zones. Whereas Sylvia hits her power spike when she hits level 6 and has her purple weapon, according to Reddit. Lastly, do they have the Wickeline buff? The Wickeline buff deals bleed damage for a couple of seconds after you hit them. Because of this, it's always a good idea to avoid fighting someone if they have the buff, especially if it's a survivor that prefers long, drawn-out fights, because the bleed damage will eventually add up over time. You can tell if someone has the Wickeline buff, 1, by paying attention to the announcement when Wickeline's killed. 2, if you click on their character model, it should show what status effects that they have, including the Wickeline buff. Location is a very important thing when going against certain characters. For example, zones that have a lot of walls, like school or chapel, are pretty much death traps against the Hyunwoo or Magnus, while zones with a lot of open space, like beach or uptown, allow for Sniper Aya to go Ultra Instinct. So always pay attention to the surrounding terrain whenever you're fighting characters like this. Separate from your enemy's strength, you should also consider what consumables that you have before you fight. If you don't have any HP consumables, then it's almost always a bad idea to fight. SP regen items aren't as important, so you can fight without them, but still pay attention to how much SP you have so that you don't run out. I'm disgusted at myself for suggesting this, but build traps if you really want to sweat, okay? You don't want to fight fair, so use whatever tools that you have. Traps are a great, but morally questionable way to skew the odds of a fight in your favor. I'm a firm believer of limit testing, so for the sake of learning, still try to take risks, despite what the odds may look like. Now that we know some ways to assess the strength of our enemies, let's go over some gameplay tips on how to play safer. I know this is the equivalent of saying get good, but always try to complete your build as fast as possible. Here are a few ways to speed up your build. Memorize which items you can leave behind if you can't find them in time. Loot dead bodies for their items. For example, if you're planning on building feather boots, but you happen to kill someone with straitjacket sneakers, make sure that you equip them for the time being so that you're as strong as possible. The same can be said for airdrops. When you get full build, you pretty much even the playing field. It ensures that you won't get blown up by someone just because they have more items than you. You also have more time to focus on other ways to get stronger, thus increasing your chances of survival. Make sure to be frequently looking at your map so that you can gather as much information as possible. Also, pay attention to pings because they tell you if someone is nearby. Make sure to utilize the satellite vision that you get at the start of each day. It doesn't give you information about what items they have or what level they are, but it does tell you who the survivor is and where they are. This is pretty important because if you know that you're starting an archery range with a Luke or a Nadine, you want to know where they are so that you can go where they aren't. I think vision is key, so I don't think I'll ever stop promoting console vision. So always make sure to be hitting those consoles so you can get as much information as possible. One of the good things about console vision is that console vision is there even if you're in a different zone, and it updates the information that you see when you press tab. Try to avoid face checking bushes if you can. Place cameras or use your skills to check the bushes before entering them. Stop being greedy. If you have HP consumables, make sure to use them as soon as you enter combat. Every tick of health that you regenerate in a fight makes a difference. It could be the difference between life and death. So don't be greedy. Think about it this way. You can always craft more food, but once you die, it's game over. I feel like this concept is kind of weird, because in most games, healing items are something that you only use when you're really low on health. So don't beat yourself up if you forget from time to time. I myself am a consumable hoarder, but with a lot of focus and support from my friends and family, I've been able to decrease my consumable hoarding to a healthy level. Looks like we made it to the end of the video. If you're still watching, I'd like you to know that this clip absolutely changed my perspective on this game. There's a time where I believed I was good at the game, but this is just insane. It might be the fact that the Sylvia's playing with 2ms, but like, damn. This was so well executed that it brought a single tear to my right eye. That's so crazy.